Iran Daily Briefing. Saturday, April 25, 2026. U.S. Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are on their way to Islamabad today, Saturday, April 25th, for talks with Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who arrived in Pakistan on Friday. Pakistan is mediating. Iran has ruled out direct negotiations with the U.S. delegation. That gap between two delegations in the same city who won't sit in the same room is the central fact of today's episode. The diplomatic track and the military one are moving simultaneously, and they are pulling in opposite directions. In Islamabad today, the two sides are close enough geographically to meet directly, but Iran says they won't. Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says Operation Epic Fury is entering a new phase, and that a second aircraft carrier will soon reinforce the naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. The Treasury has sanctioned a Chinese refinery for buying Iranian oil and frozen hundreds of millions in digital assets linked to Tehran. Israel has signaled readiness to resume strikes, according to France 24, pending authorization from Washington. Iran's parliament speaker says the real battlefield is financial. Today we'll cover the Islamabad talks and what they do and don't represent. We'll cover the sanctions, the International Chamber of Shipping's call to release captured crews, and what to watch for as a congressional deadline approaches next week. The headline is this: two senior U.S. envoys are in Islamabad today, and so is Iran's foreign minister. But they are not meeting directly. Iran ruled out direct negotiations with the U.S. delegation, France 24 reports, despite Araghchi's presence in Pakistan. Al Jazeera reports that as of Friday, Iran had not committed to direct talks. The White House confirmed the travel. Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said on April 24th that Witkoff and Kushner would travel to Islamabad Saturday morning for Iran talks mediated by Pakistan. So the structure is indirect. Pakistan in the middle, messages passing through Islamabad rather than across a table. On the US side, the framing is forward-leaning. Trump told Reuters on April the 24th that Iran plans to make an offer aimed at satisfying US demands. That statement is attributed directly to the president. Source Item 32 notes that a U.S. official also told Reuters on April 24th that Witkoff and Kushner were set to travel to Pakistan to meet with Iran's foreign minister. These may be two separate statements from the same day, one from Trump, one from an unnamed official, or they may reference the same event described differently. The sourcing does not resolve that. Both are noted here. Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani discussed the Washington-Tehran ceasefire in a phone call with Trump on April the 24th, according to Al Monitor. Pakistan's mediation role today fits a pattern of Gulf and regional states serving as conduits. Defense Secretary Hegseth said Operation Epic Fury achieved what he called a decisive result and is now entering a new phase, one that, in his framing, gives Iran the opportunity to pursue a peace deal. He also said the U.S. naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz will be reinforced by a second aircraft carrier. The ceasefire scope questions flagged in the previous two episodes remain publicly unresolved. What the ceasefire covers, whether it extends to the Strait of Hormuz, and what the nuclear component of any deal would actually require, none of that has been publicly clarified. What to watch? Whether today's Islamabad talks produce any joint readout, and whether Iran's position on direct negotiations shifts. The indirect format tells you something about where both sides currently stand on trust. Story 1. Sanctions. The U.S. Treasury sanctioned China's Hengli refinery for buying Iranian oil, Al Jazeera reports. The Treasury stated the refinery has generated hundreds of millions of dollars for Iran's military. Separately, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced the United States froze $344 million in digital assets linked to Iran, according to Middle East Eye. The timing of the Hengli sanctions relative to the Islamabad talks is a fact in the record. Whether the timing is deliberate is not sourced. What is sourced, Both measures were reported this week, though exact publication dates for the sanctions announcement have not been confirmed in today's items. Listeners should note that caveat. What to watch? Whether Tehran responds publicly to either the Hengli sanctions or the digital asset freeze, and whether Beijing issues a statement on the Hengli designation. Story 2. Captured crews. The International Chamber of Shipping is calling on both the United States and Iran to immediately release the crews of captured vessels. The organization's director stated that the capture of ships by both sides violates international law, Al Jazeera reports. Earlier this week, reporting established that the US military seized 2 Iranian-linked oil tankers described as part of a global shadow fleet. The April 23rd vessel seizures, flagged in yesterday's episode, remain without a CENTCOM statement as of this reporting. The ICS statement is notable because it frames both sides as equally accountable, not a position Washington or Tehran has publicly accepted. What to watch? Whether either government responds to the ICS statement and whether CENTCOM issues any statement addressing the April 23rd seizures. Story 3. Spain's refusal. France 24 reports that Spain refused to allow US forces involved in the Iran war to use bases on its territory or airspace. No Spanish government statement is quoted directly in the sourcing, and no US response is reported. This is a single-source item. What it signals about NATO alliance cohesion during the current conflict is a question the sourcing does not answer. What to watch? Whether other NATO members follow Spain's position, and whether Washington responds formally. Story 4. Iran's Parliament Speaker. Iran's Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said the main battleground for confronting the United States lies in financial warfare, according to Mehr News Agency and IRNA. That statement was made on April the 24th. On the same day, Ghalibaf warned that Iranian forces would defend the country, in his words, trench by trench, in response to Israeli threats against Iran's leadership, Middle East Eye reports. Israel has signaled readiness to resume strikes, according to France 24, pending authorization from Washington. That report carries a single source. These statements sit alongside the Islamabad talks, a diplomatic track and a rhetorical posture of military resolve running at the same time. What to watch? Whether Ghalibaf's financial warfare framing is echoed by other Iranian officials, and whether Israel's readiness signal draws a public US response. The cold open raised a specific question. 2 delegations in the same city not meeting directly. Here is what the sourcing adds. Police were stationed near the Serena Hotel in Islamabad's Red Zone on April 25th, the venue identified by Middle East Eye as the expected location for US-Iran talks. Araghchi arrived Friday. Witkoff and Kushner departed Saturday morning, per the White House. Iran ruled out direct negotiations, per France 24. Pakistan is the mediating party. That is the structure as it stands today. Proximity without direct contact, with Pakistan carrying messages between the two sides. The Islamabad talks. The most immediate watch item is whether today's indirect talks produce any joint statement, any movement on Iran's position against direct negotiations, or any public readout from Pakistan's government. If nothing emerges by end of day Saturday, that itself is meaningful. The War Powers Act deadline. Al Monitor reports that a Trump administration official named Reed Rubenstein, whose specific title could not be confirmed from the sourcing, released a statement days before a May 1st deadline for the administration to obtain congressional approval for the war under the 1973 War Powers Act. That deadline falls next Thursday. Watch for whether members of Congress raise this publicly and whether the administration files any formal notification. The naval blockade. Hegseth said a second aircraft carrier will reinforce the Strait of Hormuz blockade. Watch for confirmation of that deployment and any Iranian response. The Hengli sanctions and digital asset freeze. Watch for responses from Beijing on the Hengli designation and from Tehran on the $344 million digital asset freeze. Israel's readiness signal. Israel has signaled readiness to resume strikes pending U.S. authorization, according to France 24. Watch for any Washington statement that either grants or declines that authorization. Today's episode covered indirect U.S.-Iran talks in Islamabad, where Iran has ruled out direct negotiations despite both sides being present. New U.S. Treasury sanctions on a Chinese refinery and a $344 million digital asset freeze linked to Iran. The International Chamber of Shipping's call for both sides to release captured crews. Spain's refusal to allow U.S. basing rights and the approach of a May 1st War Powers Act deadline. One note before you go. The New York Times, as reported by France 24, published a single-source account this week claiming Mojtaba Khamenei lives in hiding, participates in decisions by handwritten notes, and fears for his life. That remains unconfirmed single-source reporting on Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei. Treat it accordingly. We'll be back tomorrow with any developments out of Islamabad and the week's close. If you found today's briefing valuable, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes every morning.